The film begins by introducing Mason, an honest, dedicated, and law-abiding police officer. One night, Mason is conducting surveillance on a secret meeting between a mafia gang and a corrupt police chief. During the conversation, it is revealed that the corrupt police chief, Vernot, is plotting to assassinate the current mayor. Vernot aims to take over the mayoral position through deceit and criminal means. Unfortunately, Mason's surveillance is discovered by a mafia member, leading to a tense chase. Vernot, who happens to be Mason's superior, becomes alarmed. Fearing exposure of his corruption, Vernot orders the mafia gang to eliminate Mason, knowing that if he survives, his sinister ambitions will be uncovered, and his dream of becoming mayor will be destroyed. The story then shifts to Mason making a call to his partner, Helene, who is still at the police station. Mason informs Helene about the mafia's plan to assassinate the mayor and the involvement of a corrupt police chief. Not only that, Mason also urges Helene not to share this information with anyone, not even their colleagues, as the situation is dire. However, their conversation is overheard by two corrupt police officers who are Vernot's accomplices. The next morning, on his way to the police station, Mason stops at a convenience store run by a close friend. While Mason is picking up a drink, a group of thugs storms into the store intending to rob it. Mason remains calm as the gang threatens his friend with a weapon. After taking the money they demanded, the gang leader senselessly murders the cashier, Mason's close friend. Furious, Mason springs into action, taking down the thugs in a brutal fight. By the end, they are all incapacitated with broken bones and handed over to the police. Though Mason is devastated by his friend's death, he refrains from exacting revenge by killing the gang members. His strong moral compass and commitment to the law prevent him from crossing that line, even in his grief. Returning home, Mason is greeted by his wife, Felicia. Noticing the sorrow on his face, Felicia offers words of comfort, reminding him that everything happens according to the will of a higher power and that all one can do is remain patient and steadfast. Mason went to see his son, Sonny, after dinner. He read a bedtime story to him, tucking him in for the night. Later, Mason joined his wife, Felicia, in their room, sharing an intimate moment together. However, their peaceful night was violently interrupted when three masked men armed with guns broke into their home. Without saying a word, the intruders opened fire, shooting both Mason and Felicia. At the same time, another group of armed men broke into Helen's home and killed him on the spot. During the chaos, Sonny, Mason's son, managed to escape by jumping out of a window when the intruders attempted to shoot him. It remains unclear whether Sonny survived or perished during his escape. Hearing the sound of approaching police sirens, the attackers fled in haste, leaving behind the evidence they had intended to destroy. It is later revealed that these masked assailants were corrupt police officers sent by Vernot. After the attack, Mason and Felicia were rushed to the hospital, but the doctors confirmed that both were beyond saving and had succumbed to their injuries. Helene, Mason's partner, was also dead at the scene of the attack. Not long after, at the hospital, Vernot, the corrupt police chief, appeared alongside his deputy Jack. Feigning grief, Vernot addressed reporters, expressing his supposed sorrow over the deaths of Mason and Helene. In reality, Vernot felt relieved, knowing Mason was silenced before he could expose his corruption. To cover his tracks, Vernot claimed to the media that the deaths were the result of an armed robbery. Shortly after, Kevin, Mason's second-in-command and a clean, principled officer, arrived at the hospital. Kevin had long harbored suspicions about Vernot's corruption. Together with the late Mason and Helene, Kevin had been working on a covert mission to expose Vernot's crimes. Tragically, Mason and Helene were killed before they could complete their mission. Despite this, Kevin was certain Vernot was connected to their murders but lacked the evidence needed to prove it. After Vernot and Jack left the hospital, a doctor approached Kevin with unexpected news. The earlier diagnosis had been wrong. While it was initially believed that Mason had died, he was actually still alive and undergoing emergency treatment. Relieved by this revelation, Kevin urged the doctor and the medical team to keep Mason's survival a secret, particularly from Vernot and his corrupt associates. Kevin realized that allowing Vernot to believe Mason was dead would provide them the advantage needed to uncover the corruption within the police force. With Mason in hiding, Kevin began preparing to continue their mission to expose Vernant and bring justice to their fallen comrades. Later, Kevin entered Mason's hospital room and discovered a cassette tape in his pocket. The tape contained an audio recording of Vernant instructing the mafia to assassinate the mayor. However, this evidence alone wasn't strong enough to arrest Vernant and his corrupt associates. The crucial video evidence, which could fully expose Vernant's crimes, was hidden in a location only Mason knew. Unfortunately, Mason was still in a coma and unable to provide that information. Fast forward 3 years. Vernant, the corrupt former police chief, had now become the new mayor, replacing the late mayor whose murder remained unsolved. In reality, Vernant was behind the assassination. At the same time, his deputy, Jack, had taken Vernant's previous role as police chief, solidifying their control over the city. During this time, Mason remained hospitalized, under the care of a devoted nurse named Andy. Every day, Andy diligently cared for Mason, not only maintaining his physical health, but also attempting to stimulate his memory by talking to him about various topics. One day, after 3 long years, Mason finally regained consciousness. Overjoyed, Andy immediately called Kevin to share the good news. However, Kevin was unavailable, and the call was answered by Jack, now the corrupt police chief. Realizing that Mason was still alive, Jack quickly set plans into motion to eliminate him once and for all. After the call, Andy informed Mason that police officers were being sent to transfer him. Realizing these officers were sent by Jack to kill him, Mason urgently asked Andy to help him escape the hospital before they arrived. To convince her, Mason recounted the tragic story of how his wife had been murdered by Jack and his corrupt allies, and how they had also tried to kill him but failed. However, Andy dismissed Mason's account, thinking it was a hallucination caused by his 3-year coma. Not long after, one of Jack's men, Lucas, a corrupt officer disguised as a doctor, entered the hospital with the intent to kill Mason. Meanwhile, Mason was preparing for a physical therapy session with the doctor. As Lucas moved through the hospital, he was confronted by a security guard. Without hesitation, Lucas killed the guard and continued his mission, determined to eliminate Mason. At the same time, Mason was being escorted by the therapist to the therapy room when Lucas called out to the therapist, pretending to need help lifting an unconscious security guard. As the therapist attempted to assist, Lucas shot and killed the doctor on the spot. Witnessing the scene, Mason quickly fled toward the elevator in an attempt to escape. Shortly after, Andy arrived and discovered the bodies of 2 hospital staff, both shot dead. Alarmed, Andy tried to call for help but found the phone signal was down. As she approached the elevator, she saw Mason escaping. Mason warned Andy about a corrupt police officer who had killed the staff and was now targeting him. Hearing this, Andy finally believed his story about the corrupt officers wanting him dead. Acting quickly, Andy helped Mason escape the hospital, leaving Lucas unable to track them down. Meanwhile, Vernant was giving a speech to his supporters when news of Mason being alive reached him. Alarmed, Vernant immediately ordered his men to eliminate Mason before he could expose his crimes. Vernant knew that if Mason revealed the truth, it would spell the end for him and his allies. Mason, now hiding at Andy's house, told her he couldn't stay there forever. He feared the corrupt officers would eventually find her address through her hospital records, putting her life at greater risk. However, Andy assured Mason that the hospital had no record of her home address or phone number. So for now, he was safe staying there, at least until he had fully recovered. On the other hand, Vernant also ordered his men to keep a close watch on Kevin, Mason's second-in-command. Vernant suspected that Kevin might know Mason's whereabouts. Kevin later contacted Mason, urging him to remain in hiding as Vernant and his men were actively searching for him. Following Kevin's advice, Mason began training rigorously to rebuild his physical strength and sharpen his combat skills. Mason was determined to seek justice for the death of his wife and his son. During this time, Mason and Andy grew closer, developing strong feelings for one another. One evening, Mason visited the graves of his wife and his son. Standing before their graves, he vowed to bring justice for their deaths and to hold those responsible accountable. The next day, Andy, leaving the hospital after her shift, was followed by corrupt police officers who had been watching her every move. Meanwhile, Kevin visited Mason to share a surprising news that Sonny was still alive and now under his care. On the night of the attack, Kevin had arrived just in time to save Sonny from being killed by the corrupt officers. The grave Mason had visited the previous night was, in fact, an empty one. Apparently, Kevin had created the fake grave to deceive the corrupt officers into believing Sonny was dead, ensuring they would stop hunting him as a witness to his mother's murder. Hearing this, Mason felt immense relief and couldn't wait to reunite with his son. Kevin then asked Mason if he remembered where the video evidence was hidden. Unfortunately, Mason admitted that after being in a coma for 3 years, his memory had deteriorated. He couldn't recall where he had hidden the video or the identities of the corrupt officers he had recorded that night. With the situation getting worsened, Kevin urged Mason to try and remember, as he was the only one who could expose the corrupt officers responsible for the former mayor's assassination. Later, after Kevin left, Mason focused on regaining his memories. By chance, while watching television, Mason saw Vernant, now the newly elected mayor, giving a speech. Seeing Vernant triggered his memories, and he suddenly recalled that Vernant was the corrupt officer behind the former mayor's murder. Mason also remembered that he had hidden the video evidence in his old government-issued house. Shortly after, Andy returned home, and Mason excitedly told her that his son was alive and staying in another city. Because of this, Mason invited Andy to join him in meeting his son. While they were packing to leave, Mason realized that corrupt officers had infiltrated the house. Mason stepped out of the room and quickly neutralized the intruders. However, as they were about to leave, they were attacked by more corrupt officers. Thankfully, Mason managed to overpower them all and escape with Andy. The story continues as Mason and Andy arrived at his old government-issued house, which was now set to be auctioned by the government. Inside, Mason was flooded with painful memories of the tragic events involving his late wife. He then remembered that the video evidence was hidden behind a wall in the house. Retrieving it, Mason immediately contacted Kevin and arranged to meet at a hotel to hand over the evidence while reuniting with his son. Unbeknownst to Mason, Vernant's men had tapped Kevin's phone and overheard their conversation. That night, Kevin brought Sonny to the hotel to reunite him with his father. However, Kevin's car was secretly followed by 2 corrupt officers working for Vernant. At the same time, more of Vernant's men had already arrived at the hotel, preparing for an ambush. Not long after, Mason and Andy arrived at the hotel. As soon as they stepped into the lobby, Mason found himself surrounded by corrupt officers. Acting quickly, Mason fought his way out, managing to escape with Andy. Meanwhile, Kevin and Sonny had arrived at the train station. Before proceeding to meet Mason, Kevin gave Sonny a heartfelt instruction. No matter what happened, Sonny had to reunite with his father, with or without Kevin. Just then, 3 corrupt officers appeared, intent on capturing Sonny. Realizing the danger, Kevin ordered Sonny to flee while he stayed behind to hold them off. Tragically, Kevin was killed by the corrupt officers. They then turned their attention to chasing Sonny. At the same time, Mason arrived at the station and saw his son being pursued. Wasting no time, Mason sprang into action to save Sonny. After an intense battle, Mason successfully defeated all the corrupt officers, including the one responsible for murdering his wife. Filled with rage and grief, Mason mercilessly killed the officer without hesitation. After the fight, Mason embraced his only son, who tearfully informed him of Kevin's death at the hands of the corrupt officers. Furious at the loss of his loyal ally, Mason entrusted Sonny to Andy for safekeeping. Determined to end things once and for all, Mason vowed to confront Vernant that very night. The story shifts to Vernant's residence, where Mason managed to infiltrate. Inside, Mason encountered the corrupt officers who had participated in the murder of his wife and friend, Helene. Though he had a weapon, Mason chose to eliminate them all using only his bare hands, unleashing his pent-up fury. After defeating the officers, Mason hunted down Vernant, who was cowering in a closet, paralyzed with fear. However, Mason refrained from killing Vernant. Instead, he shot him in a non-lethal area, ensuring that part of his body would be permanently incapacitated. As this unfolded, The police arrived and arrested Vernant. It turned out that Andy had handed over the video evidence of Vernant's crimes to the authorities. For his role in exposing the corrupt mayor, Mason was promoted to police chief, a well-deserved recognition for his perseverance and dedication. Moral lesson from the story: never bring a gun to a fistfight unless you're the bad guy. Then you'll still lose to a really mad cop. Also, if you're a mayor with secrets, maybe don't mess with someone who has nothing left to lose.